It's time to peel back with Maddie Levine, presented by Fight Bananas.
We're back for a very special episode, and as always, thank you for joining. Now, you may have heard that all of the positions are clinched for the 2023 semifinals for the PFL MMA, and it's going to be fantastic. We got the first one coming up in San Antonio, then we're going to NYC. It's going to be awesome, and the PFL color commentators probably have the best seat in the house, and it is manned by none other than Randy Couture. Randy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on. Yeah, and we do have the best seat in the house. I feel like I'm sitting next to two of my college buddies in the best seats in the house, and we have a blast. Providing some color and some insight into the fights in the cage, the smart cage.
I finally saw my first PFL live show. I went to one of the shows in Georgia, and I was pretty close, but certainly not as close as you. So it was a good time. But where are you joining me from today?
I'm at home in Vegas. Yeah, I'm at home in Vegas. I don't leave here until Friday. I'm going up to an appearance at a small fight show at one of the Indian reservations that's up in Washington, the Tulalip Indian Reservation. That's actually up where I grew up in Everett, cool. Marysville area. So it'd be nice for me to be back up home. Hopefully get to see my mom and some of my college or high school buddies, and it should be good.
I love it. I love that you're still a mama's boy. That's wonderful. Teach these youngins something. You still got to call mom. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you are a veteran and you founded something very special, the Extreme Couture GI Foundation. And it looks like you just wrapped up a fun little meet and greet. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I just had our fifth annual motorcycle poker run up in the Quad Cities. That's in Bettendorf, Iowa, Moline, Illinois, right there on the Iowa-Illinois border. And one of my very, very good friends, Mark Bam Pastelnik, and a whole crew of his friends up there, the Hepners or the Hempels, and that's Nicole and Greg. And he's got his own little crew up there that helped him organize that ride up there. And this is our fifth year. It grew. It's grown every single year. They're very organized. I think we raised about $50,000 for the Foundation for Wounded Combat Veterans. So it was a really fun weekend. We had a blast. A bunch of friends up there, and Mark and the Hempels just do an amazing job of organizing that for my foundation.
I mean, what does it mean to you to see so many people really just gravitate towards this foundation and help such a great cause?
It's amazing, honestly. We started the foundation 15 years ago. It was me and my gym staff here in Vegas at Extreme Couture, and we started with motorcycle poker runs just because there's a very strong connection between our veteran community and the military and the biking culture in every city. And it's just been one of the fun, very successful things that we started doing for the foundation. To raise awareness about our wounded combat veterans that are in transition. Many of those guys and gals, once they're injured, they're in the hospital for sometimes up to 2 or 3 years, getting fitted for prosthetics, going through major surgeries, sometimes up to 20 surgeries. And it was touring the wards in 2007. I was there with Don Fry and Ken Shamrock. We did a barbecue at the Fisher House, which is kind of the military's version of the Ronald McDonald House. They take care of those caregivers. That's moms, dads, wives that come down while their loved ones are going through the hospital process of getting themselves straightened back out. And it was there hearing those stories of the financial woes of some of these folks, their cars with boots on them in the garages. They can't, they've been there 9 months and they can't afford to get that boot taken off or pay the fees. So, losing jobs, losing houses, all that sort of thing. It just breaks your heart. And it was under those circumstances that I wanted to start this 501c3 to raise awareness about these folks that have been wounded and try and raise some cash to take that financial pressure off of them while they're in that transitional state. And so we get to go every year to the hospital, sit down. The staff there helps me identify those folks that need a little extra financial boost. And last year we sat down with 12 families and we hand out, $10,000 check to each of those families. They don't even know why I'm there. They just think they're meeting some dumbass, knob-eared celebrity. And so it's a really, really good day. We've expanded our mission a little bit. We're providing some counseling services to some of those guys that need a little extra help in fixing the TBIs and the PTSD. And we all know the stats that are going on in our veteran community for those. We've also created a portal in our website at xcgif.org. If there are any veterans out there that are struggling with bills, Go through that portal, fill out the information, show me those bills. We'll pay those bills off and get them off your back and take that stress out of your life as well. So we're trying to do what we can to help these men and women since 9/11 that have made the ultimate sacrifice and are trying to get back to being contributing civilians to this society.
I mean, you're doing such incredible work. And not only are you doing that, but then you also are still very much involved in the MMA community, being the color commentator for PFL. In your opinion, what sets the PFL apart from
Well,
the
I
rest?
mean, first and foremost is the format. I mean, taking MMA and putting it into a true sports format with a regular season, a playoff, and a championship every year, like every other sport we've grown up with, is very unique. It's not the prize fighting model. It's not the WWE model that the UFC is using. It's a traditional sports format. Now that's unique, certainly to prize fighting, to MMA and boxing is never. I don't think anybody's ever done that before, and that was certainly the first thing that's going to get your attention. Like regular season, what the heck is this? And
Right.
so I think that foremost, that format first and foremost, and then I think what that format creates is a meritocracy. If you want to talk smack, talk smack. It's not going to get you anywhere. You've got to go into that cage, score points, win fights, and score enough points to get to the playoffs and have a shot at the title that season.
Yeah.
It's that simple. So we've just put the fighter's destiny in their own hands, which I as a fighter like, and I think the fighters have responded to. Now, what I think some of these guys don't recognize is what they just signed up for. You were going to fight 4 times in 8 months. That is a lot.
Yes.
You need to figure out how to manage your camps, how to manage
the
injuries, the weight cuts, all those things factor into that turning around every 8 weeks and fighting again. And I think that's a big challenge. But I think at the end of the day, all the fighters seem to they know where their next fight is. They're not waiting for that phone to ring. Like, when am I fighting again? So they know exactly what they're in for. Now figuring out how to manage that and get that combination right, so that each and every time you step out there and turn around, you can score those points, finish those fights, and develop enough points to make it to that championship.
Yeah. And it just keeps it exciting. Like, technically there's no top dog, right? Everybody's got it. Everybody can be on the chopping block. And it's just one of those extra evolutions that we're seeing in MMA. Now, MMA is evolving incredibly fast.
Yep.
Good or bad, what has evolved the most in the world of MMA, in your opinion?
Well, I think the science of athletics, obviously I'm an example of that. I'm one of the older guys that fought till I was 47. And I think you're seeing that not just in our sport, but across the board. Athletes in every sport getting more out of their bodies and dialing into that science of athletics. I'm trying to run this Ferrari. I better put good stuff in this Ferrari if I want it to run right or run for very long. And I think we've all as athletes recognize that. So across the board, I think you're seeing more and more athletes compete at a higher level. What used to be 30, certainly in combative sports, was 30. I think it's now closer to 40 or even maybe over 40. So I think that we're seeing the benefit of that. And we're seeing the benefit of this third generation of mixed martial artists. The first generation was out to prove that their fighting style was the best fighting style. And I think I came in on the cusp of that, moving into that second generation of fighter. I recognized that my wrestling background was not enough. It was a great place to start, but it was not enough. I needed to learn and cross-train and learn all this other stuff. What are these jiu-jitsu guys doing? How do I deal with this Muay Thai and this striking and this kicking and all this other stuff? I had to set about learning those skills and being proficient in those areas. That's that second generation of fighter. Now we're seeing this third generation of fighter that saw us and they're like, that's what I want to be. That's what I want to do. And they didn't care about a belt. They didn't care about any of that other stuff. They said about training and being a well-rounded mixed martial artist and using all the science of athletics that are at our disposal now. And we're seeing some amazing athletes and some amazing matches across the board. And I think the Challenger Series in the PFL is a perfect example of that. On paper, most of these fighters have 2, 3, maybe 4 or 5 fights. Some of them a little more than that, but not many. And on paper, you think, oh, this guy's going to get housed. He's not gonna be able to survive at this level. But man, time and time again, we're seeing guys come out of that Challenger Series and really have an impact on the regular season and get a crack at being in the finals, being in the playoffs. And that, I think, is a tribute to this third generation of fighter that is using everything at their disposal to be the best they can be in mixed martial arts.
I think you nailed it with you have to be well-rounded now. Like, there's no one-trick ponies anymore. And it's like you can't just have one discipline. You have to know the game in and out. And now we're seeing light heavyweights and heavyweights throwing high kicks, killing it in the Muay Thai clinch. I'm like,
Yeah.
what is happening? And it just makes it so entertaining. In your opinion, I mean, how would your wrestling or maybe your striking up in this modern day MMA world?
Yeah, I worked very diligently on learning the jiu-jitsu stuff and figuring
Right.
that out. Certainly from as a wrestler, and I started wrestling at 10 years old, and I had to shift my mentality. I was trying to catch up to that black belt in jiu-jitsu and learn as much of that as I could because I knew that's what I was going to be facing in that cage. And I had to, and the Josh Barnett fight was a very big fight for me. I lost that fight. It was my first loss in the sport. Cost me the title. And it was an error in tactics by me. I mean, 9 times out of 10, I don't think Josh could take me down or put me on the bottom. But I got into a scramble with him, and I pulled guard and pulled that great big guy on top of me. I mean, what was I thinking? And it cost me the fight. And so I had to recognize that I was never going to catch up with those black belts in jiu-jitsu. I needed to stick with the one and dance with the one that brung me, which was wrestling, and get back to catch wrestling and focus more on that instead of trying to play the jiu-jitsu game. I also had to learn the striking, and I worked with Quinton Chong, world champion in Muay Thai. He helped me a lot with my striking game. Scotty down at Boxing Works, and those guys were the first boxing guys I got to work with, traditional boxing guys. Tony was a huge partner and great workout partner for me out of Boxing Works as well, that helped me shore up that striking, helped me shore up that boxing and figure that part out. Maurice Smith, who I fought in my first title fight with, he's the one that helped me with the kickboxing thing. I just fought Pedro Hizo. I got the crap kicked out of my lead leg. He's the first one to pull that off and punish me with those kicks in that fight. I won a unanimous decision, but I paid the price.
Yeah.
They forced me, that's when Zuffa just bought the company, and they were sure Pedro was going to be their darling for the Latin American crowd. And I was kind of the fly in the ointment there. So they forced me into an automatic rematch with Pedro. They just signed him to a 9-fight deal. And they were stuck with my 40-something-year-old bud as their heavyweight champ. I don't think they liked that. But and then I went to Maurice.
Well, too bad.
Yeah, right. I didn't mind being the fly in their ointment. It was pretty much that way for me. But I went to Maurice to shore up my kickboxing.
Mm-hmm.
And man, he was happy to help me and taught me a bunch, changed my stance, changed a bunch of stuff. And the second Pedro fight wasn't even close. I kicked him and he never landed one kick, and he didn't make it out of the third round. So it was a much different.
It's all about evolving, right? It's
Exactly.
all about just learn.
It's not about where you're at right now. It's about where you're going. That's most important.
Absolutely. And which leads me into the next little question here. I know you've probably been hammered about Ngannou, asked every question under the sun, but I have to at least ask one,
Hey.
But I'm curious, was there any disappointment when you realized that his first fight back was not going to be with the PFL and it was actually going to be a boxing match?
No, I know, obviously he trains in our gym. I know there were some inklings about him trying to foray into boxing before he ever even started negotiations with the PFL. So that wasn't a huge surprise. And it wasn't a surprise to me that the PFL was going to allow him to get that boxing match in before he actually steps into the pay-per-view model for the Professional Fighters League. So I wasn't too surprised by that. I think the thing that swung those negotiations and that Francis really lit up about was becoming the chairman for the PFL in Africa, and getting the chance to develop opportunities and situations for athletes in the area where he grew up to be able to come and do the things that he's doing right now as the world's best fighter and the heavyweight champion of the world. So that's what made him light up. And he has a clear vision on how to make that happen. It was just in Saudi Arabia with him and a bunch of the other PFL people as we negotiate and work with the Saudis to develop PFL Middle East. And obviously Francis is part of that conversation because PFL Africa and PFL Middle East share geography. They touch those places are very close proximity to each other. So it makes sense that there's going to be those crossovers between North Africa and Africa and the Middle East. And that's going to take both the chairmen from both of those regions to develop those skills and those opportunities for those athletes. So I'm proud of Francis for stepping up and advocating for fighters and trying to do something to change our sport. I think he's a very, very smart man and an amazing athlete.
Yeah. I mean, you certainly had your fair share of contract battles back in the day.
Yeah.
Really trying to stand up for yourself. And you've said before that you never stopped wishing fighters could maintain more power. And when you were watching Ngannou through all of these negotiations, you must have had a sense of pride knowing that maybe possibly this was going in a better direction where a fighter finally has more power. Is that how you felt?
I think that Francis is a great example of that. He's, certainly I had my run-ins with the company, both SEG and Zuffa, the two owners of the brand of the UFC, over contracts, over pay, over ancillary rights. I mean, those are all the things that led to my issues with the company and put me, frankly, persona non grata with the company. I was happy that Francis had the gumption to stand up for himself. It wasn't about the money. It was about that advocacy for fighters and doing his best to shine a light on the disparaging difference in fighter pay between boxers and MMA fighters. I think Jake Paul's another one that's been doing that, poking Dana White. Those crossover Triller fights with Ben Askren, Tyron Woodley, Anderson Silva. He was very calculated in the athletes he chose to step into the boxing ring. Most of them predominantly grapplers and grappling backgrounds, but and he accounted for himself very well in those fights. And then the first thing he does is poke Dana in the chest about fighter pay and why aren't you taking care of your athletes better and all that. I'm not a big fan of the rhetoric and the trolling and some of that stuff, but if it takes a guy like Jake Paul to shine a light on our sport and disparaging issues in our sport, then I'll get behind Jake Paul all day long. And Conor McGregor was the first to have an opportunity. I mean, certainly I made my waves, but Conor had a sharp opportunity to change our sport when he got a boxing license. That literally rendered his contract with Zuffa null and void because of the Muhammad Ali Act. Most people don't. But he chose to keep Dana White and company involved in that boxing match with Floyd Mayweather and keep them where he could have literally walked away from the UFC completely. And that would have been a big deal. And it would have shown the difference and why there's transparency in boxing because of the Muhammad Ali Act, and there's no transparency in mixed martial arts. Nobody knows what these promoters are making off any of these events. I'm curious how the PFL and how the fighters are being paid and treated in the PFL, how that affects the ratio of what fighters are getting paid in our sport. And if it has moved that bar up a little bit, because the PFL is doing a great job there, taking care of these fighters in each of the fights in the regular season. And then obviously that $1 million purse sitting at the end of the rainbow if you make it to that title fight. But generally, 13 to 15% of the revenue from any single event is going to the athletes that fought on that card, which in today's society is ridiculous in professional athletics. That's ridiculously low. Just about every other professional sport, it's at least at 50%. And boxing is 65 to 75%, depending on who's on those cards. So, there I think is the area where our sport needs to grow. We need to create that transparency. And we as the fighters are the commodity. As soon as we recognize that, as certainly those top echelon guys like Francis Ngannou or John Jones start chirping and start holding out and demanding better treatment, advocacy, 401ks, health insurance. These are all things that none of us in the sport of mixed martial arts enjoy. And every other professional athlete in our society does enjoy those things.
Yeah. Well, it's a start that the conversations are finally happening. So hopefully this is going to snowball into an even bigger conversation. But you're right. I mean, insurance seems like a no-brainer to me, especially for somebody that's like risking their health. But hey, that's just me. So let's get to the semifinals. We're kicking it off August 4th, San Antonio. And we're not starting off with the heavyweights. We're getting into the light heavyweights and featherweights. So I'm not going to make you go down the card. There's a lot of killers on it. There's a lot of, amazing fighters in the semifinals. But if there is one piece of advice that you could give any of these fighters in the semifinals, what would it be?
Well, first of all, congratulations for doing their work in the regular season to score those points, to get those finishes, to accrue those criteria points to even get the nod and be in the playoff. And that's a huge deal. Now it's serious. Now the intensity really steps up. It's literally win or go home, which adds a whole nother layer to the onion as far as pressure and keeping all that in perspective, putting the right frame around the circumstance, freeing yourself from a lot of that so that you can walk out into that cage and do exactly what you trained to do. And that is the trick. Letting a bunch of this other stuff go, not taking in the pressure, not taking in the scrutiny of the fans and all of that's going on right now as you potentially get a shot at a new shiny belt and $1 million check. So keeping that in perspective, keeping it simple, letting go of a lot of that other stuff, staying laser focused on your training and peaking and going out there, whether it's in San Antonio or the 2 Madison Square Garden fights, getting the job done and getting the nod so that you get a shot at that big check and that belt. So that's the goal. That's the mental skills. That's the mental side of our sport. We all practice a lot of time on the physical skills, but very few spend the time to develop and sharpen those mental skills that they need to deal with the adversity this sport presents.
Absolutely. And I'm excited to really dive into those semifinals starting up August 4th. Before I let you go, I want to play a little game with you. We're going to play a little game. We're going to call it Then and Now. Okay. So history often repeats itself. We see fighters often taking inspiration from fighters that came before them. So who is this generation's version of the following fighter? So I'm going to give you a name of a fighter, and you're going to say, okay, they're kind of like this person or so-and-so. It might be a little hard, but I have faith in you. I have faith in you.
Right.
Okay. So who is this generation's version of the following fighters? Lyoto Machida.
Oh gosh, Lyoto is the Rubik's Cube of MMA. He's such an enigma with his Kyokushin karate background, his footwork. I mean, obviously, I studied Lyoto well. That was my last fight, my retirement fight, and I wanted to fight him because he's such an enigma and such an interesting style.
And it doesn't have to be a heavyweight. It doesn't even have to be in the PFL.
I had Cesar Mutante Freire come into my camp when I was preparing for Lyoto Machida because he can move his hips and his footwork is very similar. He had actually been in camps with Lyoto, and he has the ability to emulate him and to mimic him, and which was hugely important for me in my training camp, trying to prepare how to figure out how to solve the problems that Lyoto presents. So Cesar is definitely a guy that I appreciate him being part of my journey and part of that camp, even though it was, obviously it wasn't a successful outing, but it was still, I did what I trained to do. So, and Cesar was part of that. So I would have to say Cesar, and he has that ability. But I was just thinking, I saw somebody else this last season that moved that same way, used their hips that same way, but I'm having trouble putting my finger on that name and who that was.
We'll get it later. We'll get it later. All right. Who is this generation's version of Brock Lesnar?
Oh boy. Another one that's so unique.
I know.
That 290-pound guy and moved the way that he moves.
Yeah.
Another one that I faced and had problems finding partners to come in the training environment and simulate him because this is just such a rare combination. Is that even the same species of human? I don't think
probably not. That might be a tough one. He might be his own species.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's another guy out there that is as big as he is, as athletic as he is, and presents all the issues that he presents when you face a guy like Brock. He is unique for sure.
How about Chuck Liddell?
Chuck had those long, rangy levers and that ability to stand out there and just dare you to come into range.
Yeah.
Another one that's very unique, and I think there's some guys that maybe try to simulate his style, but I haven't seen anybody that pulls it off the way he pulled it off. For there was I think a 5-year stretch there, and him and I crossed paths a couple times in that 5-year stretch where he was at the top of his game and really kind of came into his own and dominated that weight class for a little while.
Yeah. Well, I think
all these athletes that are so hard.
I know I made it hard for you. I really did. But I think this is just, it's showing that you guys are veterans and just veterans of the game for a reason. It's like after all these years, there's no other Lyoto Machida. There's no other Randy Couture. So, it's really cool to see what you've done for the sport and how it continues to evolve. And now you get the best seat in the house for the PFL playoffs. So when do you head out to San Antonio?
I'm actually leaving Friday, headed up to a small event up in Marysville, Washington.
That's right. Yep.
Where I grew up. And then I'll be leaving from there and going to Orlando on Sunday. I'm doing 3 days on a film called F+.
Nice.
It's a comedy, which I don't get to do much of. So I'm excited to work on this.
Right.
And then I'll go right from Orlando to San Antonio. So I got to bring my suits and all my stuff with me. So we'll be ready for fight night, for the weigh-in show and the fight show on the 4th in San Antonio.
Excellent. Well, I'll have to keep my eyes out for that new film and have a great time at the playoffs. It's going to be great.
I'm excited to be in San Antonio. I think it's going to be a great venue for us and a lot of fun.
Well, thank you for your time, Randy. And again, go PFL.
Thanks, Maddie. Appreciate you.